So thank you for allowing me to participate today. I'm going to speak about something I'm really interested in, Martin Luther King and the fight for the right to vote, as you said, the Bloody Sunday, and the importance that media communication had in the past. So I'm going to start by saying that in a democracy, we are used to considering the right to vote as something innate in us that belongs to us and as something of our own from the beginning. We rarely consider it as something we have always said, but just a few times we wonder if it's really innate in us, if we have always said it, and if we have always had the opportunity to perform it. Retracing the history of the 20th century, we can see how many battles were fought for people's rights, from the suffragettes to the LGBTQ rights, up to civil rights, with the most important figures that signed the development of human history, such as Martin Luther King or Nelson Mandela. Keeping in mind the right to vote is glaring, if not instantaneous, the linking we can make with Martin Luther King and what the city of Selma in Alabama lived in the second half of the 60s. It had vital importance what African Americans redeemed in 1965 in the state of Alabama, when federal Judge Johnson approved the right to march for 5 days to Montgomery. What happened before that, and what actually brought to the call of such a long march? That's what we have to wonder about. It's March 7th, 1965, the heart of the decision that opened the march for the right to vote, the so-called Bloody Sunday, when 600 activists got attacked by Selma police and brutally repressed on the Atmos Petrus Bridge in front of a huge audience on TV. Communication had an important role. It created routes throughout the whole US, breaking down the barriers of segregation and attracting thousands of activists who later marched to Montgomery. Therefore, it's important to analyze the vote, the right to vote, even from its historical perspective, from the point of view of those who fought to achieve it, paving the way to a battle that still persists today. Martin Luther King was born in Atlanta on January 15, 1929, city where he grew and attended the early years of school. King graduated at the age of 19 in sociology before beginning doctoral studying in systematic theology at Boston University. He also attended philosophy classes at Harvard University in 1952. King's aspiration was becoming a doctor or a lawyer, but he later decided to follow his father's advice to become became a Baptist pastor. Throughout his life, he was held by his wife, Coretta Scott, and he had 4 children, frequently nominated in his speeches. It's important, it's his contribution and involvement in activism and in the fight for civil rights. Martin Luther King had a key role in the fight for the right to vote, one of man's fundamental rights. The right to vote is the right which allows the individual to express his or her will during an election. Its importance comes especially from its unrestricted and personal nature. In different countries, it's a constitutional right. And in the United States, it has had a long process of growth. Yet we have to start from the original constitution and analyze its evolution. Until the 1870, only white men were allowed to vote. African Americans were left aside, being subordinated. The right to vote has been, in fact, a moral and a political issue throughout the history of the United States. And we could talk about it for hours, especially about its role and development in the American constitutional process. We can say that at the beginning, no African American was allowed to vote. But when the 14th Amendment in 1868, after the Civil War, was ratified, it granted citizenships to all persons born or naturalized in the United States. In 1869, the 15th Amendment prohibited the government from denying a citizen the right to vote based on that citizen race, color, or previous conditions of servitude. The major effect of these amendments was to enfranchise African American men and minorities, the overwhelming majority of those who were freedmen now in the South. A question still persists. Whether the African Americans were now allowed to vote or not. And the answer, unfortunately, is negative. The 15th Amendment prevented any state from denying the right to vote to freedmen, but it also applied, as I said, to non-white minorities, such as Texans, Mexican Americans in Texas. Although the amendment stated it precisely, Especially in the South, the segregationism kept flourishing, prohibiting African Americans from entering the police stations. The white resistance, in fact, to Black suffrage after the war regularly erupted into violence as white groups tried to protect their power, particularly in the South, where groups like the Ku Klux Klan used violence and intimidation to keep freedmen in a controlled role and reestablish white supremacy. At the turn of 20th century, the Alabama state legislature passed a new constitution that disenfranchised most Blacks and many poor whites by requirements from paying poll tax and passing a literacy test and comprehensions of the Constitution, and the subjective application of the laws closed most Blacks out of politics. In 1961, the population of Dallas County was 57% Black. But of the 50,000 Blacks who were older enough to vote, just 130 was registered, just 1% of those who could vote. By the 1960s, the county officials and the Citizens Council used such tactics as restricted registration hours, economic pressure, including threatening people's jobs, firing them, evicting Blacks from leased homes, and boycotting Black-owned businesses, and violence against those Blacks who tried to register. But after the Birmingham church bombing on September 15th, 1963, which killed 4 Black girls, Black students in Selma began sitting inside the local lunch counters to protest segregation, but they were physically attacked and arrested. More than 3,000 of them in 2 weeks were arrested in the protests, and the hard line of segregation was represented by Dallas County Sheriff Jim Clark, used violence and repression to maintain Jim Crow. The Selma Voting Rights campaign officially started on January the 2nd, 1965, when King addressed a mass meeting in the Brown Chapel AME church in defiance of an anti-mating injunction. Overall, more than 3,000 people were arrested in protests between January the 1st and February the 7th. And Blacks only achieved fewer than 100 new registered voters. In addition, hundreds of people were injured and blacklisted by employers due to their participation to the campaign. What we are focusing on today is what happened when the first march organized by Dr. King took place on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. How did the Bloody Sunday start, and what was the cause behind it? On February 18th, 1965, a march was led to the courthouse of Marion, but state troopers had been told to rush at the protesters. Protester Jimmy Lee Jackson and his mother fled the scene to hide in a nearby cafe, where he later got shot, dying 8 days later. After Jackson's death, emotions were running high, and the march was called from Selma to Montgomery to talk to Governor Wallace and directly about Jackson's death. Governor Wallace eventually denounced the march as a threat to public safety, saying that he would take all measures to prevent it from happening. On March 7th, 1965, an estimated 600 civil rights marchers headed southeast out of Selma on the US Highway 80. The march was led by John Lewis, and it went according to plan until the marchers crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge, where they encountered a wall of state troopers waiting for them on the other side. I refer to what John Lewis said about the Bloody Sunday. Let you watch the real video that that was transmitted in TV, and he actually said that he gave a little blood on that bridge in Selma for the right to vote. So I'm just going to let you see, to let you watch the video, and then I keep talking. it's actually pretty hard to see. Sunday night was the biggest night for TV watching, and ABC had a very special draw for viewers. A broadcast of Judgment in at Nuremberg, the film that with the Holocaust and the moral culpability of Germans in the genocides of the Jews, approximately 48 million people were watching it. But shortly after the film started, ABC interrupted the film with this report from Selma. The juxtaposition of a narrative about the Nazi brutality towards victimized Jews and with the footage of Southern segregationist brutality against victimized Blacks was incredibly powerful. And although newspapers were the first source for news, television was far more important in bringing the news of Selma up to the nation than were the newspaper like the New York Times. The story of how the Bloody Sunday coverage reached the public is interesting and helps explain why the footage galvanized citizens, legislators, and commentators. The role that the media had in a Bloody Sunday and the number of viewers led to a second march, the turnaround Tuesday. King led about 2,500 marchers out of the Edmund Pettus Bridge and held a short prayer section before turning them around, thereby obeying the court order preventing them from marching, making a full march. King feared, in fact, that exiting from the city was going to block them outside of it at their return. That evening, 3 white Unitarian Universalist ministers in Selma for the march were brutally attacked and by KKK members, and worst injured was Reverend James Reeb from Boston, who later died, provoking mourning throughout the county. On March 11th, 7 Selma Solidarity activists sat in the east wing of the White House until arrested, while the next day President Johnson had an unusual belligerent meeting with a group of civil rights advocates. President Johnson told the press that he refused to be blackjacked into action by unruly pressure groups, and the next day he arranged a personal meeting with Governor Wallace, urging him to use the Alabama National Guard to protect marchers. On March 11th, Attorney General Katzenbach announced that the federal government was going to prosecute local and state officials who were responsible for the attacks on the Edmund Pettus Bridge on March 7th, using an 1870 civil rights law at the basis for charges. On March 15, the president convened a joint section of Congress outlined his new voting bill rights that was asked to be passed, introduced in Congress. 2 days later, the bill was passed that summer and signed by Johnson as the voting rights bill on August the 6th, 1965. A week after Reeb's death on Wednesday, March 17, Judge Johnson ruled in favor of the protesters, saying that their First Amendment right to march in protest could not be abridged by the state of Alabama. He said, in fact, the law is clear that the right to petitions one's government for the redress of grievances may be exercised in large groups. These rights may be exercised by marching even along public highways. Most of the participants were Black, some were white, and some Asian or Latino. Most spiritual leaders were from multiple races, religions, and creeds. Marched with Dr. King. The march lasted 5 days till the 25th, when 25,000 people marched from St. Jude's to the steps of State Capitol building in Montgomery, where King delivered the speech, "How long, not long." The third Selma March received national and international coverage. It publicized the marchers' message without harassment by police and segregation supporters, gaining more widespread support from other civil rights organizations in the area. And this third march was considered an overall success. We can totally understand then how important the media can be, how powerful can be their role in spreading information. Televised images of Bloody Sunday attracted thousands of people, helping to put an end to a violent humanization which had lasted for too much at that time. I'm going to slowly conclude my discourse, my speech. The media and Dr. King, all of those who were there and fought, those who were killed or injured, changed the path of history, underlining an important aspect of human beings' life: freedom. Freedom that at the time was still limited for minorities. There was the need for an earthquake, and the US have had different ones so far. It remains to be seen whether history has taught us something or not. And the great battles for civil rights and freedom were fought by huge crowds with multiple deaths. People died for their freedom and life. It's right that history rewards them for what they have done and for what they have left to us. It remains uncertain if we have actually really understood and learned what happened before us. Last year, different protests erupted again in the US for problem related to racism. We can see two different responses to the same problem. If King's fight helped the US grow, it doesn't mean that the problem got cancelled entirely. The violence that has been produced during these months is a symptom of a society disgregated and divided, I'd say polarized, that still hasn't dealt with its history. This time the media helped too, having a huge effect on the topic, probably in a more powerful way than in the past. If 50 years ago, the problem of a nation remained mostly circumscribed to the nation audience, now they are put under the international point of view, the international side. And the election of Obama created an important precedent. Selma allowed through the Voting Rights Act of 1965, a more defined opening to the vote in the United States. But this has never eliminated a problem that is too intrinsic of the American society. Oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever. The yearning for freedom eventually manifests itself, said Martin Luther King, sure that things would change. King died in 1968, leaving in mourning a nation that he and many others successfully improved. Representative John Lewis said that when King died, something died in all of them and in America. Each day, I think we must find a way to dream the dream that he dreamed and build on what he left, all of us. And I cannot add anything more. I think Representative John Lewis, what Representative John Lewis has said is enough. So I'm going to leave you with these thoughts and I'm going to conclude my speech. Thanking you again for your time, and that was appreciated. Thank you.